There's a certain kind of quiet that only lives in the corners of family gatherings. It's not silence, exactly. The room is alive, silverware clinking, layers of laughter peeling back across the table, someone asking for more gravy. But in that corner seat, just past the second leaf of the dining table, there's a stillness that wraps around me like a wool shawl. Familiar, heavy, slightly frayed at the edges. That's where I always sit. Near the window, by design or by habit, I'm not sure anymore. This past Thanksgiving, Jessica placed me there again, smiling as she adjusted the cranberry-colored table runner. "You get the best light over here, Mom," she said, without really looking at me. The best light. I almost smiled at that, as if I were a houseplant she'd been assigned to keep alive. I took my seat early. I always do. There's something about watching a room fill in around you that softens the blow of not being part of its center. The smell of rosemary and sage drifted in from the kitchen. Familiar, comforting. For a moment, I let myself remember a time when those smells came from my own stove, when the voices that filled the house were the voices of my children, smaller then, messier, louder, needing me. Back when they used to tug on my sleeve and ask me things. Things like, "Does the turkey really need to rest?" Or, "Do I have to eat the green beans?" Now they ask Alexa. Or no one. I sipped my water, room temperature, no ice, and listened. Jessica was laughing about her school's new accreditation process. Alan was talking about municipal bonds. Claire showed off a new bracelet. The conversation flowed like a river I hadn't been invited to swim in. I watched the way they leaned toward each other when they spoke, how they folded their laughter into napkins, warm and casual, as if the world made perfect sense when shared among equals. I used to be the one who set the table, who remembered everyone's favorite pie, who stayed up the night before prepping stuffing and softening butter. Now, my contribution is mostly quiet, and perhaps that's why they don't ask anymore. I wonder about that sometimes, not bitterly, but with the kind of ache that settles into your bones when the weather turns. Did they stop asking because they forgot what I used to be? Or did I make it easier by letting them forget? When Alan mentioned the hospital, it startled me. "Remember when Mom used to take us to the nurses' station?" he said with a soft chuckle. She was like the queen back there. Everybody knew her name. Claire chimed in. "You always smelled like rubbing alcohol and cinnamon gum." They laughed. I smiled too, faintly. A half memory in human form. Nobody asked what I do now. Nobody asked if I still keep busy. They think I fill my days with crossword puzzles and slow walks to the mailbox. I didn't correct them. Not because I don't have stories to tell, but because after a while, you start to wonder if telling them would change anything. Outside the window, a single yellow leaf drifted past the glass. It hovered a moment in the light, then spun, quiet and sure, to the ground. They always set a place for me, just not one they expect me to speak from. There's a smell that clings to early morning dirt, earthy and damp, with just a hint of last night's chill. You don't notice it unless you're close enough to touch the ground, and most people don't kneel like that anymore. Not unless they're planting something or burying something. I do both. Behind my small home, what the neighbors politely call a mobile cottage, though it's really just a trailer with good bones, I tend a garden. Not for show. There are no roses, no stone paths, or trimmed boxwoods. Just 3 raised beds, made from repurposed wood Alan left behind during one of his cleanup weekends. Tomatoes in one, herbs in another. The third is my wild bed, whatever seeds the wind carries. This morning, the basil had started to bolt, tiny white flowers waving like little flags of rebellion. I pinched them off gently, one by one, letting their smell linger on my fingers. Sharp, green, insistent. I like that about basil. It refuses to be ignored. When I'm in the garden, time loosens. I don't think about the things my children forget to ask. I don't think about the dinner tables, or the name cards, or the quiet space near the window. I just dig, and weed, and water. Things grow when you tend them, and when you don't, well, they find a way to grow anyway, just not always where you expected. The neighbor's cat, a sleek gray thing with white paws, sometimes watches me from a distance. I've never fed her, but she still comes. Some things don't need rewards, they just need consistency. The soil here is stubborn, rocky in places, dry in others. You have to coax it into giving. I've learned how to mix in coffee grounds, how to test pH levels with red cabbage water, how to listen when the leaves droop. Not as a failure, but as a request. Funny how plants will tell you exactly what they need if you bother to look. People, not so much. Jessica once asked why I bothered keeping a garden at this age. She said it the way some people say, in your condition, as if I were suddenly made of glass. I told her it helped keep my knees from locking up. That was easier than explaining the truth. The truth is, the garden reminds me I still have the power to create, to nurture, to kneel and rise again. Not because anyone is watching, but because something in me refuses to stop rooting. Sometimes I wonder, do we stop growing because no one's looking? Or do they stop looking because they think we've stopped growing? I harvest what I can and leave the rest for the birds. I've come to appreciate that not everything has to be useful to be worthy. Later that day, I placed a small bundle of herbs in a brown paper bag, left it on the neighbor's porch with a note. For your soup. Try the time. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. By dusk, the sun leaned low across the backyard, casting long, soft shadows between the garden beds. I stood there quietly, hands still dirty, watching the light stretch over the soil like a benediction. No one sees this place. No one asks about it. But here, in the quiet, things grow. And I do too. There's a particular comfort in the clink of porcelain. Light, hollow, familiar. It reminds me of hospital trays from my nursing days, of community potlucks with mismatched mugs, of long ago mornings when Harold would bring me tea in bed and forget the sugar. Now, it's the sound that marks the start of my Tuesdays. Every week, at precisely 2 o'clock, I set out a small folding table in the side room of the church annex. It's nothing fancy, just a space with thin carpet, a faint scent of lemon cleaner, and a few donated chairs that creak like old knees. I bring the tea, Earl Grey mostly, and sometimes ginger cookies, the kind that crumble if you don't hold them gently. At first, it was just me and Edna, who wanted to learn how to email her granddaughter in Oregon. She brought a tablet still sealed in plastic, a gift from Christmas past. I'm not good with machines, she'd whispered, as if admitting a sin. I told her I wasn't either, not at first. We sat side by side, hands hovering awkwardly over buttons, neither of us fully trusted. Week by week, our circle grew. Ruth wanted to learn online grocery shopping. Mr. Delaney brought a notebook full of passwords he couldn't remember creating. Sylvia just wanted to know how to join a Zoom Bible study without summoning a demon, or her ex-husband, whichever came first. We called ourselves the Silver Bridge Circle. Someone suggested it as a joke. You're bridging us into the digital age. But the name stuck. So did the ritual. We always start with tea. Because technology is intimidating, but a warm cup between your palms can make you braver. The learning was slow, gentle, sometimes full of laughter, sometimes full of tears. One Tuesday, Edna managed to send her granddaughter a voice message. It was short and shaky. Hi, sweet pea. Grandma's trying this new thing. I hope it reaches you. When her granddaughter replied 30 minutes later with a video, Edna cried. So did I. No one in my family knows about Silverbridge. I haven't told them. I suppose they think I spend my Tuesdays playing mahjong or watching daytime television. It's easier to let them assume than to explain something they may never care to understand. Still, sometimes I catch myself wondering, if the good we do never gets noticed, is it any less good? I don't need praise. But I've learned there's a different kind of loneliness that grows when your purpose blooms in private and no one ever walks through the garden gate. Last week, I printed out a flyer. Nothing grand, just a title in large font and a picture of a mouse being held like a teacup. Technology for late bloomers, it read. Tuesdays at 2. Beginners welcome. I tacked it to the bulletin board outside the pharmacy, just beneath a lost cat poster. Someone took one of the little tear-off strips at the bottom. Just one. I smiled when I saw that. Maybe someone out there wants to learn. Maybe someone wants to be seen. And maybe that's all we really want in the end. Not to be applauded, not to be envied, just to be useful and gently remembered. There's a pause just before a video call connects, where the screen is black and everything goes still. It's only a second or two, but it stretches, full of hope and worry, like standing at the threshold of a room you haven't entered in years. That stillness has become familiar to me. Last Tuesday, Mr. Harold Mayfield, 82 years old, widowed, sharp as a tack in some places, foggy in others, walked into our Silverbridge session, holding a brand new tablet like it was a sleeping cat. My son sent this, he said, a little sheepishly. Said he wants to see my face more often. I nodded and smiled. We can do that. It took nearly 45 minutes to get the microphone working. Mr. Mayfield had large fingers and a habit of muttering under his breath whenever the screen blinked. At one point, he sighed and said, "These things don't like me." I placed a hand gently on the table between us. They just don't know you yet. Eventually, the screen lit up with the familiar ringtone, one long chime, then another. Mr. Mayfield sat straighter, his breath caught. Then, as if by grace, the screen flickered, and there he was. His son, smiling from 3 states away, waving, calling. "Dad, you did it!" Mr. Mayfield didn't speak at first. He just looked, really looked, and then he whispered, "You're right there. You're right there." His hand lifted, almost involuntarily, reaching for the glass. I looked away for a moment, not out of politeness, but to steady something in my own chest. That kind of reunion, however simple, stirs memories you didn't ask to feel. I remembered Harold, my Harold, once waving to the kids on a fuzzy airport video call before his last deployment with the Red Cross. That tiny screen held so much life. And then, silence. That's the strange thing about connection. When it works, it's nothing but a screen. When it's gone, it's everything you miss. Mr. Mayfield spoke with his son for only 5 minutes. They didn't say anything profound, just asked about groceries and grandkids and how the weather had been. But when the call ended, he turned to me and said something I won't forget. He thought I was gone, but now, he sees I'm still here. I nodded, unsure whether to speak. What could I add to something so true? Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold and the tablet resting on the charger beside me. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old wall clock. I thought of Mr. Mayfield's face, lit up by that soft glow, and the way his shoulders lifted when his son said, "Dad," like it still meant something. I've built many things in my life. Homes, meals, order in a hospital ward. But this invisible bridge between generations, between longing and recognition, it felt like the most sacred work of all. I sometimes wonder, quietly, Is it possible to matter deeply to strangers and not at all to your own? That night, I didn't fall asleep right away. I sat in the stillness, and for a long while, I held the echo of a voice saying, "You're still here." Not to me, perhaps, but in that moment, I believed it too. There's a certain weight to an envelope that arrives without your input. Thick cardstock, expensive, the kind that smells faintly of glue and lavender, like it sat too long on a desk where no one really knew what to say. Jessica had chosen the design. A watercolor wreath in muted greens, embossed lettering that read, "Celebrating Margaret Whittaker's 70th birthday. Hosted by Jessica and Alan." Hosted, as if I were an exhibit, something to be curated. Inside, there was a small RSVP card and a note in Jessica's handwriting. "Let us handle everything, Mom. You just enjoy it." I ran my fingers across the ink. It was smooth, impersonal, the kind of message people write when they're being thoughtful but not present. Like sending flowers instead of showing up. The party was set for a Sunday afternoon. A country club banquet room, all neutral tones and polite lighting. When I arrived, early, as always, the room smelled of citrus polish and new carpet. The kind of smell that tries too hard to be clean. There were framed pictures of me on a long table near the entrance. Most were from decades ago. Weddings, holidays, snapshots from the days when my hair was still the color of wheat and my hands were always full. I didn't remember choosing any of them. I doubt they asked. Near the punch bowl, Jessica was adjusting napkins. She turned, startled, when she saw me. "Oh, you came early. That's good." Not warm, not unkind. Just administrative. I watched as she flitted from one table to the next, directing staff, rearranging place settings, smoothing out wrinkles I hadn't noticed. Alan stood by the fireplace, talking to someone from work. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he raised a glass and gave a half wave. No hug, no walkover. I took my seat near the edge of the room, by the windows again. Always by the windows. Guests began to arrive. Neighbors, old colleagues, distant cousins. Many of them greeted me with the same phrase. "You must be so proud of your kids, throwing this for you." I smiled. I nodded. I let them believe what they wanted. The truth was, I hadn't been asked what kind of celebration I wanted. I hadn't been consulted about music, food, or who should speak. They called it my day, but it never stopped feeling like theirs. One woman, a former nurse from the old hospital, leaned in and said, "Back then, you could command a room just by walking in, Maggie. You remember?" I did. But I also remembered how easily a woman can go from commanding to contained. The speeches were polite, a little rehearsed. Jessica thanked everyone for coming. Alan cracked a joke about my legendary stubbornness. Everyone laughed. I did too, because that's what people like me do in rooms like that. We laugh on cue. We stay gracious. We don't interrupt the version of us they've chosen to remember. And yet, part of me wondered, when people honor your image but not your essence, is that still love? The cake was beautiful, layers of vanilla and raspberry. Jessica had chosen buttercream over fondant. "You always said fondant was for show," she told me. I smiled again. She remembered something. That was enough, I suppose. But even as the candles flickered and everyone sang, I felt strangely elsewhere, as though the real me had stayed home, among the herb beds and mismatched teacups and the quiet Tuesdays that no one ever saw. Later, as the room thinned and the light faded into soft gold against the windows, I sat quietly, watching my own face smile back at me from a photograph on the display table. A much younger version, caught mid-laugh, eyes crinkled, shoulders unburdened, and I thought, she would have wanted a different kind of party. Some emails arrived like a whisper. No urgency, no subject line in all caps. Just a quiet line of text waiting patiently for you to see it. It was a Thursday afternoon, rain tapping softly against the windows. I'd made a second cup of tea, Not because I needed it, but because the warmth in my hands felt like company. The house was still. The only sound was the low hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards settling in. That's when the email came in. Subject: Story submission. Claire M. It had arrived through the Silverbridge website, part of a new section we'd quietly launched called Letters from Home, a place for people to share what our little program had meant to them. I hadn't expected many, but every now and then, one came through like a note in a bottle. I clicked. The video opened on a young woman, maybe mid-30s, soft brown sweater, curls tucked behind her ears. She sat on a couch beside an older man, thin, with a fleece blanket over his knees. The light was gentle, late afternoon gold. Behind them, a photo hung slightly crooked on the wall. A family, mid-laugh. She began. "This is my dad, Richard. Last year we almost lost him. He was in a care facility upstate. After his stroke, he couldn't speak clearly, and he didn't want to see anyone, not even me." She paused. Her hand found her father's, gently. But then someone at the facility introduced him to this program, Silverbridge. It helped him learn how to call me. Slowly, patiently. We started with video messages, then calls, then weekly check-ins. And something happened. He came back to us. I felt my chest rise, a little too fast. My fingers trembled slightly on the edge of the desk. She smiled at the camera. "I don't know who built Silverbridge, but thank you. You didn't just help my father connect. You helped him feel like he still mattered. And you gave me my dad back." She didn't know me. She didn't know my name, or where I lived, or what I looked like. She didn't know that I'd typed every page of that website by hand, that I'd hauled folding chairs into that church annex week after week, that I'd spent nights wondering if it all made any real difference. But she knew the work. She knew the bridge, and that was enough. I sat back in my chair, tea now cold, untouched. I stared at the screen for a long time as the video looped back to the still frame of Claire smiling beside her father. There was a strange ache in my throat. Not sadness exactly, not joy. Something quieter. Something like reverence. It made me wonder, can we be known best through what we build, even when the builder is forgotten? I didn't forward the video to anyone. I didn't bring it up at dinner or drop hints in family group texts. I simply downloaded it, placed it on a small flash drive, and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. Not for proof, but for peace. Outside, the rain had slowed to a hush. The sky was that soft, silvery blue that comes just before dusk. I reached for my tea, now lukewarm, and took a sip. Sometimes the truest gratitude comes from strangers, and somehow, that felt like enough. There's something about velvet chairs that always makes me sit up a little straighter. It's not the comfort. They're usually too stiff for that. But the texture. The way it pulls slightly against your clothes. As if to remind you, you're not quite meant to relax here. You're meant to behave. That's how the chairs felt at the engagement dinner. Claire and Alan had chosen a downtown restaurant. Polished wood, low lighting, a little too proud of its imported salt. The kind of place that whispered more than it spoke. I arrived 10 minutes early, like I always do. Old habit from my nursing days? You never want to be the one running into an emergency late. Jessica looked surprised when she saw me. "Oh, you came?" she said, as though I might not have. "You asked me to," I replied simply. She nodded, then glanced at my dress, a navy blue wrap I'd worn for comfort, not approval. Her eyes lingered just long enough for me to feel it, then moved on. I was seated, again, near the end of the table. By the wall this time, half-shadowed. I didn't mind. I've come to find comfort in the edges of things. Claire arrived 20 minutes later, radiant and buzzing with gratitude. She hugged me warmly, just as she did the others. No more, no less. At that moment, she didn't yet know. Dinner passed with the usual flow: speeches, stories, laughter choreographed by champagne. Someone toasted to future legacies, someone else to building together. I sipped slowly, tasted little. Not out of defiance, just habit. You learn to stay light on your feet when the center of the room isn't yours. And then, near dessert, Claire turned to me. Her tone was light, almost idle. "I've been meaning to ask, Margaret, what do you do again?" It was such an ordinary question, the kind people ask at dinner tables, not expecting much in return. I paused. Not for effect, just to choose the version of the truth I wanted to offer. "I run a digital learning program," I said. "For older adults, we help them connect. Video calls, online basics, that sort of thing." Claire blinked. "Wait, what's it called?" "Silver Bridge." She froze, utensil mid-air, eyes wide, scanning. I saw something shift. "You started Silver Bridge?" she asked, slowly, her voice a little softer. "I did." Her breath caught. "I submitted a story to your site," she said, more to herself than to me. "About my dad. About how he called me again. I didn't know." I offered a small smile. "I saw it. It meant a great deal." Claire stood, right there in front of the whole room. She turned, looking around, and said, voice trembling but steady, "This woman, she helped my father speak to me again. She built something that changed our lives." The room fell quiet, the kind of hush that feels full rather than empty. Jessica looked down. Alan's fork hovered mid-cut. No one moved. No one clapped. But something deeper happened. A realignment. A recognition. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I wasn't just someone's mother or someone's guest. I was someone. And for the first time in a very long while, the velvet chair didn't feel like a place to sit still. It felt like a seat that had finally, quietly, been earned. There's a certain quiet that follows a public moment, like the hush after a choir stops singing. It's not silence exactly. It's the air adjusting to what's just been revealed. The morning after the engagement dinner, my house felt especially still. The kettle whistled with a kind of softness, like it didn't want to wake anything. I moved slower than usual, not tired, just thoughtful. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, fingers curled around the mug, still warm. The same mug I'd used for years, ivory porcelain, rim chipped at the handle, a faint stain at the bottom that no amount of scrubbing could erase. I used to care about those things. Now I find comfort in them. Some marks are meant to stay. My phone buzzed once. A message from Alan. "Mom, I'm sorry I never asked." That was all. No explanation, no emoji, no attempt to soften the edges. Just 7 words, plain, almost gentle. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. Not because I was waiting for more, but because there was something in its simplicity that made me still. For years, I had tried not to want this. Not just from Alan, but from any of them. Acknowledgement. The kind that isn't forced or prompted, but that arrives on its own, like a leaf landing in your lap. Unannounced. Undeniable. And yet, when it came, I didn't know whether to feel grateful or simply let it pass through me like wind through an open window. I didn't respond. Not out of pride, not even hesitation. Just a quiet knowing that some things are better held in silence, like a seashell you press to your ear. Not for the sound, but for the memory it carries. Later that afternoon, the landline rang. Jessica's number. Twice. I didn't pick up. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't ready to fold the moment into something smaller. Did they truly see me now? or just the reflection of something they finally recognized? And does it matter if the light is reaching, even belatedly? I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the flash drive, the one with Claire's testimonial still tucked in a paper sleeve. I didn't play it again. I just held it in my palm for a long while. It was smooth, ordinary, light, and yet it held something that had traveled far to reach me. I placed it back in the drawer and closed it gently. Not locked, just resting. That evening, I walked out into the garden. The basil had gone to flower again, white blooms stretching upward, stubborn and lovely. I didn't pinch them this time. Some things deserve to bloom, even if it's later than expected. There's a kind of quiet that settles over the post office on weekday mornings. Not the impatient quiet of lines or lost packages, but something softer. Envelopes whispering against each other, the muted stamp of rubber against paper, and that faint scent of cardboard and ink that always reminds me of new school years and old Christmas cards. I stood there, holding a small padded envelope. It wasn't heavy, just a flash drive inside, wrapped in tissue and tied with a ribbon the color of sage. There was no return address, just a note tucked inside that read, "For the staff at Maplewood Assisted Living, lifetime access, no fees, full support." No name, no explanation, no credit needed. Claire had mentioned offhandedly that her father spent his final months at Maplewood, that he loved the bingo nights, hated the food, and once told a volunteer, "My daughter saved me with a screen." She hadn't meant for me to act on it. It wasn't a request, just a passing memory shared during lunch. One of those rare conversations where her eyes didn't flick to her phone every few minutes. But I'd remembered, and I'd built something, quietly, over the span of a few nights. A custom interface, simplified for their staff, their residents, personalized tutorials, printed guides in large font, voice commands for those whose fingers trembled. Not groundbreaking by any tech standard, but it was steady, kind. It worked. I didn't sign my name, didn't attach a logo. Some offerings aren't meant to echo back. Walking back to my car, I thought about how often we give with the hope of being seen, and how sometimes the purest kind of giving happens when no one knows where it came from. Does it still count if no one claps? Does it matter less when it doesn't end in a headline? I don't know. But I do know the peace that came with sealing that envelope. Not a victory, not vindication, just stillness. The kind that comes when your heart beats a little quieter, because it knows it did something right. That night, Claire called. Her voice trembled, lightly, like wind across tall grass. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. "But you did this," she insisted. "You didn't have to." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I know. That's why I did." After we hung up, I walked into the kitchen. The garden outside had fallen into shadow, save for one golden line of sunlight pressing against the edge of the window. On the fridge, I pinned a small slip of paper, something I'd jotted down weeks ago but hadn't known what to do with. Some connections outlive misunderstanding. And as the house settled for the evening, I stood there quietly, hand resting on the cool metal of the door, and let the words linger. Not as a lesson, not as a triumph, just as truth. There's a kind of morning light that doesn't rush in. It lingers. It waits, like it's checking in with the world before fully arriving. That morning, I stood in the doorway of my sunroom, barefoot, the floorboards cool underfoot. The lace curtains were breathing gently with the breeze. Outside, the hydrangeas had turned that early autumn shade, somewhere between ivory and rust. I'd always loved that moment when flowers begin to fade, not because they're dying, but because they're softening, returning. The house was quiet. No buzzing phones, no emails waiting. just the distant coo of mourning doves and the scent of cinnamon from the candle I'd lit hours earlier. I reached for the teacup on the windowsill, one I hadn't used in years. It had belonged to my grandmother. The rim was fine and gold-lined, chipped slightly on one side. I remembered how she used to hold it with both hands, even when it wasn't hot. She said it helped her remember she was holding something delicate, something worth pausing for. That morning, I brewed tea the way she did. Loose leaves, steeped slow, no rushing the process. I sat in the same spot she once sat in, facing east, where the sun filtered through the leaves of the old oak. And I asked myself, quietly, was I ever truly invisible? Or did I simply grow tired of asking to be seen? The question floated in the space between my breath and the steam from the cup. Silverbridge was doing well. Claire had quietly offered to expand it through her foundation. Nothing grand, no announcement. Just a whispered suggestion over lunch. Let's get it into more hands. And I said yes, not because I needed help, but because I was ready to let the work grow without needing my name attached. Alan had started calling on Sundays again. He didn't always say much, just updates, a recipe he'd tried, a book he thought I might like. I didn't ask for more. The cadence of his voice was enough. Jessica sent me a card last week. No apology, no preamble, just a watercolor of a bridge painted in her hand. Underneath, she wrote, "Thank you for building something I didn't know I needed to cross.